Hi, this is Chris Young, and welcome to Good News on Tap for the Feast of Christ the King. And a Happy New Year to all of you. Now, it may seem a little strange to wish someone Happy New Year, but from a liturgical perspective, it is indeed the end of one year and the beginning of the next one. Next week is the first week of Advent, as we begin our countdown to Christmas. Since this is the end of the year, the scripture readings naturally talk about the end of time, in which we finally experience the fullness of the kingdom. We'll finally be in the presence of Christ our King, who rules everything. There are lots of different kinds of rulers. There are harsh dictators who take advantage of their position of authority and care nothing for the people beneath them. And then there are great leaders who put the people first and care for the people's needs. The scripture gives us an insight into what kind of king we have. In the first reading, we have a king who is a good shepherd, who cares for every member of his flock, and he protects them. In the psalm, again, the image of the shepherd is used, a shepherd who tends all of our needs. The second reading makes it clear that our king is the king of all. He is above all other kings and everything. Even death is subject to him. The defeat of death is our king's final victory. We also learn that our king is a king who judges at the end of time and will be called to judgment. And we get the insight in the gospel this week as to how we will be judged. Typically, fidelity to a king means to be a servant to the king himself. But in the gospel, we see that the way we serve this king is by serving the people around us. The king says to one group, when I was hungry or naked or imprisoned or sick or whatever need I was in, you were there to help me. The people seemed confused because they never saw their king in those conditions and did not recall that they had ever treated him as such. But this king is different because he says, whatever you do for even the least of my people, you do for me. Then he condemns those who did not care for him when he was hungry or naked or in prison or sick or whatever way he was in need. These people reply that they never saw him in such a light. They never saw him in need. But again, he responds that whatever you failed to do to even the least of my people, you failed to do for me. It's very clear that in this harsh reminder that it's insufficient just to simply declare ourselves a loyal follower of Christ the King. We cannot just take the name Christian and be done with it. We have to live out those Christian values and care for those who need the most help. Simply professing our loyalty to the King is not enough. We have to do what he expects us to do, and his expectations are that we treat one another as if even the least of us was the King himself. And then there's a pleasant surprise in this story as well. There are those who do not see themselves as servants of the King. They see themselves simply as humanists who care for one another but are not religious. At the end of time, I think they'll be surprised to find the gates of heaven open to them as well. They will ask, when did I ever honor Christ the King? When did I ever proclaim myself a Christian? I wasn't religious. I didn't go to church. I didn't do all the things that so-called Christians do. But nevertheless, they treated their fellow human beings with love and compassion. And so even though they did not realize it, they were doing the will of the King. And they will be welcome in his kingdom at the end of time. Now, of course, it's best if we can do it all. It's best if we're aware that Christ is our King, and we're aware that the way that we honor him and show our loyalty to him is to be good to his subjects and even to the least of his people by meeting their needs. So the gospel challenges us to recognize Christ as our King, and also challenges us to do his will. If we honor the King in the way that he wishes for us to do so, then we will definitely be welcomed into the kingdom at the time of judgment. And that's Good News on Tap for the Feast of Christ the King.